Welcome to Verse.io and Sales Intel's webinar, Text or Not to Text, the best practices for mobile numbers. And it's quite a hefty topic. I know we've had a lot of discussions just trying to prep what do we want to highlight, what's going to go into this. And so I'll just give our speakers, Phil and Paul, a moment to introduce yourselves.
I'll go first.
Okay. Hi, I'm Paul Love. I'm the head of business development at Verse, and I've kind of been in high-tech startups my entire life, and Verse is definitely the most exciting one I've ever landed up in. I've been here almost 2 years with the company, and have been in a position to learn incredible amounts about texting and mobile numbers and how to capitalize on those in the business environment. Just to give you a little background of what Verse is and why all of this is relevant, Verse is a lead conversion platform and service. So we're essentially in the business of following up with leads for our customers. And those customers are all different types of customers: B2B, B2C, agencies, lead gen companies. We're following up with lots of different types of leads, and we do it primarily with two-way conversational text. So that's why I've got a background of relevance for this webinar. We've had millions and millions of text conversations with leads across different industries, and we essentially reach out to them, have a conversation, qualify the leads, and for the ones that are qualified, we pass them back to our customer sales team, either through booking an appointment or a live transfer or some other different ways we can reconnect our customers. But that's essentially what Verse is, and super excited to be here today, and also really excited about the partnership we have with Sales Intel. You know, the combination of what we do and what they do, and kind of the access to mobile numbers and what to do with them is a really relevant topic these days.
Thanks, Paul. My name's Phil. I'm the director of business development for Sales Intel, and we also appreciate our partnership with Verse. Just some background on me. I've been in the tech startup and tech space for the last 15 years. I've been in business development leadership for the last 8, and I've been lucky enough to open up a lot of markets throughout the globe and move to those markets between Dublin, London. Most recent stint was helping open up an office in Sydney, Australia. And so this topic is interesting on so many levels because it's evolved dramatically in the last 2 years. And this being my first stateside role since January, I'm seeing so much relevance on this very topic. So excited to talk about, contact data and understanding how this best practice can be utilized properly. So thanks everyone for joining.
Awesome. And with that, we'll go ahead and get into the meat of it. I'm going to pass this off to you guys, and we'll come back for the Q&A.
Great.
Thank you, Ariana.
If I can get the screen to go. Oh, too soon.
Great. Thank you, Ariana, very much for helping us. So yeah, we just wanted to just go over a quick idea of what to talk about today. Talking about why mobile numbers are important and how this topic has evolved recently. A lot of context, and this means something different in different parts of the world, but what gives you the right, how to properly leverage your mobile numbers in various aspects of either your sales cycle or other. What are those best practices? And then we'll do some live Q&A at the end for anyone that has any questions for Paul or myself.
Great. So just to get into the meat of it, what we at Verse, we put a poll out on LinkedIn a few days ago just to get a pulse on, what are companies doing these days in terms of, are they leveraging text in their outreach for inbound leads? And you can see the results here. This is nothing super official, but I think it's reflective of what really is happening out there in the world. It's still a small percentage of companies who are taking advantage of text in their follow-up with leads. And there's many reasons for it. You can see, 15% of them said it depends, which is telling because it does depend. It can be complicated, and there's automated outreach and manual outreach and everything in between. So it's not a simple topic. And, that's kind of what we're here address today. But I guess the take home on this slide is that there's a lot of low hanging fruit, and there's huge opportunity for many companies who have not really taken many steps yet to get into this world of texting with leads. Go ahead, Ariana. And then, why are these mobile numbers so important? Everybody kind of knows the answer to this. Everybody's got the basic idea down. Like, text is obviously a way to get through the noise. It's known to be more effective than email and phone. But seeing some data points kind of brings it all to life and shows, how much better it is, because it truly is kind of a miracle channel as far as I'm concerned. You can see here, it's, compared to email, it's 5 times better in terms of open rates. And it's fast. Like, people within 3 minutes, when you send a text, it's typically read. So, and often that's an average. So often it's much faster than that. And we all know this because, we all get hundreds of texts every day, and there's not a huge difference between texting with your friends and texting with businesses. There's a much higher response rate, over text versus email. There's just a lot of stats. It goes on and on and on in terms of why text is so effective. And it's worth talking about. You can see the stats and you can believe the stats or not, but I think if you understand the psychology underneath some of these stats, it helps. There's become quite a hesitancy, in terms of people for the phone, in terms of picking up phone calls from numbers they don't recognize, or even numbers they do recognize. Like, when you're on the other side of a lead conversation and there's a sales team reaching out to you one way or the other, you don't necessarily want to. You want to be in control of the conversation, and that's why texting is so effective, because fundamentally a text conversation puts me, the lead, in control. I can decide how much I want to talk to you, when I want to talk to you, how deep this conversation will go. If you're a pushy, obnoxious salesperson, I can get rid of you without being awkward. There's just a million reasons that text is just comfortable, and of course, it's a generational thing as well. I mean, for younger generations, it's basically the default way they like to communicate, because it's instant, it's fast, it's 24/7, it's always there. There's a lot underneath, a lot under the hood in terms of why these stats are true and why they are what they are today. And that's what we at Verse have tried to kind of understand and leverage in doing things as effectively as possible with text. Go ahead. Next slide, please.
Great. So, in talking about manual usage of phone numbers, first off, high level, what does that mean to you, Paul?
Well, manual, I think it's kind of a gray area, right? We can talk about manual versus automated. I mean, the classic manual means that, I'm a salesperson or I'm a business person and I want to contact somebody, and I'm going to pick up my phone and I'm going to text them, right, manually. The other side of that spectrum is what Verse does, which is that it's a fully automated software platform to do that for you, and it's done, with an initial text and ongoing nurturing of text, and it's all automated and driven by AI, and a much more complicated, in-depth way of doing things. And then there is some kind of gray area middle ground. When you have a sales team and they're following cadences, and they're using various software platforms to manage those cadences, some people might feel like that's dipping into the world of automation or not. And I don't think there's really, there really are no hard and fast rules to determine if that's true or not. But the point is that that's a little bit gray. But I mean, personally, I think a team of people using some kind of a cadence capability, but still doing things manually, ultimately, where it's not, where you're not using some type of software to essentially initiate the call or the text, that's still manual.
Right. I appreciate the, just the high level idea of that. And I agree. I think it's, there are some gray areas, contexts and situations. Taking a step back, a lot of people on this webinar probably know who Sales Intel is, but we offer contact data for your revenue drivers through your marketing enrichment as well as your sales reps. And so with great power comes great responsibility, right? If you have millions or hundreds of thousands of cell phone numbers and access to them, you can't abuse that. And what you were talking about there, a lot of context around your sequences and your processes is important. And one thing that we've done that I think is helpful, that maybe takes away some of the gray area, is say you have a BDR or an SDR reaching out to a customer or potential customer. They set a demo or have an engaging discussion. And at the end, the BDR is likely going to set up a discovery call or some sort of technology demonstration for his or her team so that the prospective client can meet with them, et cetera. A great way to get this out of the way, and this works in any country, is, hey, do you mind if I text you before the meeting starts, just to make sure, just as a friendly reminder. And just getting that on the phone call out of the way is a nice way to verify that would be okay. And that way, when you do get that, if the prospect gets that text, it's not a huge surprise. Moreover, not only is it great for ensuring hold rates for the initial demo, but I've had sales reps do the very same as they go along the journey of the discovery, where they're maybe built a relationship and they use texting for reminders and communication so that it's a bit more familiar and maybe less dry than an email. You think about it this way: if you were to call a family member and it's super important, you're most likely not going to text them, you're going to call them. And I know many of you on this call are very proud of what your company represents. And so the most important messaging, you're not going to blurt out on that text. You're going to start that engagement and at least pique their interest through email, LinkedIn, and hopefully a phone call where you can interact with each other and ask questions and have some meaningful dialogue. But the texting, similar to a relationship with your family, can be an augmentation of that. Some of the texting is just to keep in touch, and I don't need to go into that, but you can look at it similarly, where the texting adds a level of familiarity once you've earned it through those discussions you might have had on the phone. So I feel that that's another way to look at it, is when appropriate, it adds almost a level of trust between the customer and your revenue drivers, but it needs to be earned first.
Yeah, and I totally agree. When I do it, I do this myself all the time. I do try and leverage, most of the other channels to get a hold of somebody, especially, when you're trying to reach somebody for the first time, they don't know who you are. Text is kind of bold as the initial way to go. Although I have to admit, I have done it, and it can be successful, but it can be scary as well. But yeah, one message that works pretty well with text when you have tried the other mechanisms is just to simply say that, I've tried to reach you on the office line and email, and I thought I'd, try text, right? That can work.
That's great context. And high level, I'm kind of stating the obvious, but professional courtesy is key. It can be a little bit scary to do that, but whether you had the opportunity to ask for explicit permission or not, I think the approach is always to be as respectful in both your wording and your approach. I think that covers the topic really well. Thanks, Ariana.
There's one more thing I would add that that I think is key. There is it's being responsive, right? Like, you're opening a can of worms when you text somebody that you better be prepared to deliver on, right? If even with your friends and family, if you know how it feels when you're having a text back and forth, and then all of a sudden your friend just disappears, right? And
yeah, you keep those. Yeah.
Like, it's one thing. It's one thing to do that to your friends, but to open up a conversation, like if you text somebody at 9 a.m. and they respond at 9:01, and then you just went into a meeting for 2 hours, that's horrible. It's a little bit different if you text them at 9 a.m. and they don't respond till 7:30 at night, and then it takes you maybe half an hour because you were eating dinner or whatever. That's a little bit different. But when you open up that conversation, you should be prepared to be responsive quickly. And that's something that obviously we solve that with automation at Verse, but so much of what we do at Verse that we'll talk about today can be done manually. You just have to be thoughtful and careful in how you do it, and realize what you're doing when you start a text conversation with somebody, because you'll cause way more damage by not being there. If they respond right away and you're gone, like, you blew it, right? Like, you're probably not going to get their attention through any channel after that.
Great point. Being responsive, and that's part of being courteous.
Yeah, so I guess that dovetails into automated usage, which is what I have learned so much about. And to talk about automated usage, you do have to talk about kind of permission and compliance first, because in the manual world, there really are no laws or rules. It's more about best practices. But when you're going to engage leads or businesses through automated methods, you have to make sure you have the right permissions, and TCPA guidelines are typically what you need to be thinking about and following. And they state that it's pretty simple. You basically need express written permission to text somebody to text or call somebody in an automated fashion. And that's not just for mobile numbers, that's for any phone number. Obviously, texting only applies to mobile numbers, but written permission means somebody filled out a web form. At the bottom of that form, we've all seen the language, by submitting this form, you agree to receive, you might get automated text or phone calls. That's what it means. And if, that's the exact opposite of what happens as you're a subscriber to Sales Intel and you get all excited because there's a mobile number of a CEO that you want to contact. You don't have the right to stick that in your automated process, right? That's manual. I mean, that's incredibly valuable piece of data, and you can act on it manually, but that's not what we consider permission. So whether these leads are coming into your own site and filling out a web form, or whether you're buying leads from some third party lead gen service or company, you need to be sure that the proper permissions were in place. And you also have to be really careful about when somebody asks you to stop communicating, you stop, right? And it's typically, for what we do, it's not just stopping, but it's updating the CRM of your customer to update the status of that lead, indicating they don't want to speak to you anymore, right? And then there's nighttime as well. It's completely different what you're allowed to do at night versus the day. Being a 24/7 lead engagement service is really powerful because there's a huge opportunity at night after most offices close down, and typically they don't follow up with leads at night, but you have to be careful. There's specific rules to follow. You can't just text somebody all night long and try it 5 times if they're not responsive. You can do that during the day if you want to be aggressive, but at night, if there's no response to a text within 15 minutes, you need to leave it alone. You need to leave it alone, and until the next day. So consents and compliance are a big deal when you're considering automated texting to leads or customers or whatever it might be. And then there's a lot of best practices, and even though what we do as a company is basically as good as it gets in terms of all the best practices, they're all rolled into one service. The good news is that you can do many things quite simply, on your own, or with small efforts of automation, or with services that provide some level of automation, but not the full blown service that something like Verse provides. So some of the things that I think are worth talking about are, should you call or text first, right? And we've been doing this for 7 years, and we used to call, and then we used to call and text simultaneously together. And ultimately, we've ended up in a place where we text first and we don't call. So now, as a service that uses text, phone, and email as needed, we only text first and we don't call unless they ask us to call. And that dovetails right into communication preferences. A best practice that's critical is to give the lead the choice of how do they want to communicate, which means reach out to them, identify yourself and why you're texting them, and give them a choice. Would they like to text, or would they like you to call? Right? Almost all of our initial texts start out with some message like that, because it makes people comfortable and it puts them in control. And as you'd expect, 80% of the people want to text anyway, because that's just how it is these days. But those who do want to call, you call them, right? And you whether you're doing it manually or with some form of automation, that's easy to accomplish. And even literally just that message, that first text, if there's one thing that you get from this webinar today, is offering choice in your initial text when you reach out to somebody is incredibly powerful. from an automation perspective, we've talked about this a little bit already, but it's responsiveness, right? You really want to strive to try and be responsive on a 24/7 basis, because you have no idea how these conversations are going to go. Some of them start and end quickly. Some of them take 3 weeks. I mean, you just don't know. And the ultimate service is one that's always there, regardless if it takes somebody 2 weeks to answer the first question you asked them. You want to respond in 1 minute if you can. So that's not easy to do. That takes sophisticated systems, but anything you can do to approach that, if you're going to be using automated texting, is definitely worthwhile. And I think it's also worth pointing out, everybody's seen these auto texting. If that's all you do, like that's great. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated and all the bells and whistles like we might have at Verse. Just getting in on the channel, right? Taking advantage of the fact that text gets through the noise, sending an auto text immediately to a lead. It solves for speed to lead. Obviously, that's critical that you're reaching out to leads immediately, which you can do when you have an automated system. And even if that can't lead to a conversation via text, if it's just intended to drive a phone call, or just to basically communicate and let them know you received the lead and you're on top of it, you're following up right away. That's very valuable, and it's inexpensive to implement, internally or with other services out there. So that's something to think about. Philip, is there anything else? Anything else comes to mind?
No, I appreciate the context, and it's very interesting when you look at the science of using text versus phone calls when appropriate. That deviates depending on the industry that you're in, and it obviously deviates whether you're going between B2C or B2B. But when I've been sold in the past, and I have created a relationship with those that are working with me, and that I'm paying them, a service for, I totally agree. I much prefer to text than a long phone call about an update on something. It's much nicer to be able to see the concise information, respond in kind. For some reason that feels better to me than an email. And as a customer and a prospector, I see the value of implementing it properly. So no, it's very interesting context, and it's fun to learn how different industries use it.
Yeah, no, it's true for sure. And I guess one other thing that you can do when you're automating this process, once you've established that you have the right to use an automated methodology, nurturing over the long term is critical as well, right? Because while most of the action is going to happen in the first day or two or week, you by continuing, there's lots of industries where it turns out that the sales cycle is long. Like solar panels. I think I'm buying solar panels this month, but I'm not, right? I mean, for whatever reason, then 3 months later I'm into it again, and 6 months later I'm looking at it again, and we at Verse will nurture leads for up to 6 months, so we'll capitalize on that on kind of that the timing of realizing that just because a lead is submitted today in many businesses, it doesn't mean the transaction is going to occur right away. So that's another tip.
Thank you. Very good tip. All right. So tying this together, best practices for mobile numbers. One of the reasons why Sales Intel is so interested and adamant and proactive in this very topic. Sales Intel human verifies 5 million of our direct dials every quarter of decision makers, and through our machine processing, we have contact data for 60 million other direct contacts. And so we're swimming in data, and we are constantly adding to that number on our website. And so we understand very well, call it the ins and outs, I don't know if that's the right way of phrasing it, but we understand very well that there's an appropriate time to use mobile numbers for text and phone calls. And in the B2B context, we find that it's not only helpful, but really necessary. We found in the last 2 years that decision makers are much less predictable in their location. And usually you can kind of squint through the phone system of a company and find them in office, but now they're on the road more, they're at home more. And utilizing this practice is becoming more and more prominent in accelerating your sales. And so this is a high level review. It's important to remember the guidelines depending on the country that you're in. I was living in Dublin during GDPR, so I know very well what the consequences are. Thankfully, not firsthand, but it's good to understand what your business can and can't do with those mobile numbers. Being courteous, concise, and responsive. Paul made a great point. You got to have a human touch to it, or else it feels automated. Of course, it goes without saying, honor those requests if they do not want to be contacted, and if they want to opt out. And offer other communication options, of course. LinkedIn is still an incredible part of my business development department's process. And again, mobile is just one of those, fantastic avenues in adding a personal touch to what we do. Any thoughts to tie up from you, Paul?
I think, I just like to encourage everybody to experiment, right? This is, I think the pandemic and all companies going to remote work environments has changed the game. It's really early in that kind of cycle of everybody trying to figure out what's appropriate, what's effective. Mobile numbers are there now for the taking. And what do you do? And make sure you don't break laws. And I think there's so much room for experimentation and improvement. And the key is just to get in the game and make sure you're doing something, because your competitors are. And you don't want to be one of those, the other 60% who are really not even taking advantage of what's possible. And small steps are worth taking, and you can build on it over time. And manual, automated, the whole spectrum is powerful and interesting.
Any questions?
Love that, Paul. I thank you guys so much for being here. I really enjoyed sitting in on the session. As a person that has been in a B2B space for my entire career, I know my data's out there. I know my mobile number's out there. I've got like at least 5 calls a day that are either like robocalls, or it's a telemarketer, or it's actually a very persuasive sales rep that has they're very good at what they do. So it's really fun to see how this is evolving, even from just the last couple of years of when, if you remember area code spoofing, when you're trying to spoof their area code because maybe then they'll pick up, it continues, and it continues to evolve. So yes, if you guys have any questions, please pop those in the chat. We will go ahead and go through some of the questions. A quick one for you, Lawrence. Yes, you will receive a recording of the session and the deck as well. So we'll take our first one from Doug. How do you switch a conversation between your automated texting platform and a live agent or rep when it is needed?
Okay, I guess that one's for me. We do things in a high, I guess I'll answer the question, explaining how Verse does this. And obviously other systems could do something similar, but at Verse, we have a hybrid model where we carry a conversation forward with AI and automation. We're using automation essentially to just run a drip campaign via text on the lead until they engage. When they do engage, if they answer our questions with simple answers, many times the AI can keep moving forward through the qualification script. But when they don't, if they say anything that AI doesn't understand fully, in our case, one of our concierges, we have concierges all over the country. They'll seamlessly enter into the conversation and guide the conversation from there. So our platform makes that happen automatically when needed, and it happens all the time. About 50% of conversations that occur via text end up having human guidance be part of the conversation. And sometimes a human being will be involved in 2 or 3 of the questions, and then it'll kind of go back to AI, taking it through the end. Hopefully that gives you a sense for how it's done.
No, really good question. We've got a couple more coming in, and I love this one because it involves all the medias. You're really thinking outside the box. Does the text service involve video messages?
Good question. I'll add my part to that. I'm a huge proponent of video prospecting. There are tools like Vimeo and others that are fantastic in adding a personal touch to prospecting. It shows that you've done your homework on the individual and that you care about what they do and what the company does. A word of caution though, when it comes to opening up a discussion with a video link in your text, a lot of companies like Apple, if your phone number isn't in their phone and your text includes a link, it's likely going to be marked as spam or some sort of bug. So it would be difficult to do in text if you're going in cold and you're not in their contacts already. However, just high level, just taking it out of the context of texting even, an intro in an email or LinkedIn, adding video is a fantastic way to improve your open rates with your messaging. Just be careful with texting. You might have to do it after you've already engaged.
Yeah, Paul, anything you want to add to that one?
No, I think Philip's got that one covered.
All right.
I mean, but it's not really, it's not part of the service that we provide. We're not doing any automation of texting, including video links, pretty much for that exact reason. They're just plain texts.
Yeah, it can be done, like you had called out with the other services that you have. So it can be done as a part of the texting strategy, but maybe that's more on the manual side of things.
Yeah.
All righty. So we'll go on to our next one. Lots of questions. I love it. What are the chances of my mobile number being marked as a spam alert while texting manually?
Paul, I'll let you go ahead first. I have my answer.
I don't really know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the answer to that one is.
I don't know the exact numbers, but it's pretty low if your number isn't aggregated somewhere as a business. If your number is a personal phone number, it's less likely. Again, there's some automated prompts, like I know iPhone does it. If it's a unknown contact, it will have some word of caution, but it's pretty low if your number is listed publicly as a personal number.
Yeah, from my experience, or at least what I've seen as a consumer on the side of the conversation, I've realized that spam texts are starting to become a thing, or maybe that's just what I've been receiving. I don't know if anybody else in the chat or anyone else here has been experiencing that until the phone company catches up to label those. But to Phil's point, unless you're using a phone number that's already been marked as spam by the provider, then very low chances, most likely. All right. Since this one is still in the same line, wouldn't spam texting risk the number being blacklisted?
If abused. Again, pretty low if you're not mass texting or if you're repeatedly going after the same contact. So.
Yeah, it goes back to your comment of be courteous. Be courteous, and then when you're doing in the automation, you can have stop gaps put in place for how you're thinking of how people would move through your buyer's journey.
It is a factor for automated texting, like in what we do at Verse. We've built a lot of technology and capability around solving for that problem, because if you do it wrong, you will get blocked. We provision lots of numbers. We will typically use 5 or 6 different variations of the opening text. It kind of follows, I think, a lot of what kind of happened with email over time as emails got blacklisted and, companies started practicing kind of different methodologies to prevent that. You do need to be careful, when it's automated, obviously for high volume. Some of our customers are low volume and you're not being noticed, but when you're doing this 1,000 times a day, saying the same thing to 1,000 different leads, the carriers start to notice. So there's lots you can do, yourself or through a third-party vendor to make sure that there's a relationship with the carriers that has to be handled properly. And that's getting more and more important now. So yeah, it's a thing for sure.
No, great questions, guys. I'll go to our next one. We have had mixed success calling C-level decision
Makers.
words decision makers. Yes, we've had mixed successes calling C-level decision makers cell phones. What would you tell sales reps to say when a decision maker asks how we got the cell phone number?
Great question. First off, I will say that Paul and I talked about this earlier this week. We're noticing that it's actually in this situation when you have the right tools, we're finding more success getting a hold of the C-level in this era versus pre 2020, 2018. And so there is an opportunity, there's a window of opportunity because the lines between work and the office have been blurred. Now, when it comes to how, that pointed question, how did they get their phone number? That's a very understandable one. Sales Intel has legally obtained these phone numbers through various means, whether they opted in at a trade show or they've opted in by other means. And so, our answer to that is around, their opt-in or their company's opt-in to list their number at some point. But I think it's very important to understand internally how you got that phone number. And, if you're using a service like Sales Intel and using the phone numbers that we provide, that answer is expressed very explicitly when you work with our CSM and then get an understanding of how we've aggregated this information. It's all information that they've actually put out there themselves at some point.
Yeah, I can add, because I've dealt with it myself. My personal experience is I just tell them the truth, which is quite often that I got it from a service. I don't mention the name, but that I got the number from the service that we use for our list generation and all of that, which is Sales Intel for Verse. But I kind of under the hood in my mind, I'm working under the assumption that it's quite likely that they're fine with it, right? They don't necessarily, if you assume that just because that you have a cell phone number and the person who owns it is likely to, wish it wasn't out there, then, you're just kind of setting yourself up for a difficult conversation versus assume that, the pandemic happened, everybody's working at home and the number became available and it's, they want it available. And if they don't, they'll tell you, but I just tell the truth.
Now that you have, aggravated jerks, but a lot of the time, Stephen is mentioning here, 80% of the time they're fine with it. I love what Paul said, tell the truth. And the truth might be, I'm not saying you're mixing up the truth, but the truth might be a different answer depending on how you got that number. But being upfront, they like it when you're straight. They got to that point in their life because they're straight up too.
Yep. No, they don't have a lot of time. They just want the honest truth and they got to move on with their day. They're going to hop into meetings and who knows what else they're going to have to deal with the rest of the day. And checking out our chat, and it looks like a lot of the remaining questions that we have are particular to Verse. So instead of going through all of those, what you guys can do is you can actually reach out to our speakers directly. So you can go to that, they can follow up with you, or like I said, you're also going to be getting this as a recap. So you can reach out to our people and we can answer all of those questions for you.
100%.
All right.
Great.
Well, thank you all for being here. Phil, Paul, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and for your time today. I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for joining. Thank you, everybody.
See you.